Welcome to the Shadow of History channel. Be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss out more videos like this one. A newspaper photographer capturing heavy fog over China's Yangtze River Bridge in 2013 unknowingly documented the final moment before a man leaped to his death, with a woman following shortly after. Photographed in London in 1935, these Pidawang women from Burma and Thailand wore brass coils that compressed their rib cages and displaced their collarbones, creating the striking illusion of an extraordinarily elongated neck. At the Grand Canyon in 1931, Albert Einstein, visiting America at Caltech's invitation, paused during his train journey east to pose at the Hopi House alongside tribal members, wearing a traditional Native American headdress and holding a peace pipe. This haunting wax construction depicts Edward Mordrake, the subject of a 19th century urban legend claiming an English nobleman was born with a second face on the back of his head. Around 1950, children stricken with polio lay side by side inside a multi-person iron lung, a machine that mechanically replaced the work of their failing muscles, allowing them to breathe when their bodies no longer could. Standing at the base of the Eiffel Tower in 1912, Franz Reichelt had persuaded Parisian police to let him test his parachute suit from the landmark, declaring he himself would be the only dummy, then jumped and fell to his death. At the polio clinic of Sudbury General Hospital in 1953, 2.5-year-old Gifford took careful steps along the walking bars under the watchful guidance of physiotherapist Mrs. E. Marr. Inside the employee cafeteria at Disneyland in 1961, the workers who brought the magic to life sat down together for a meal behind the scenes of the world's most famous theme park. On a Washington, D.C. beach in 1922, officials measured women's swimsuits to enforce strict length laws, with those found in violation facing fines or arrest, as seen in a second photo taken in Chicago for the same offense. Held today by the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, this photograph captures the faces of German prisoners of war in 1945, as American forces made them watch footage documenting the full horror of what the concentration camps had done. In 1993, Queen Elizabeth II raised a British L-85 battle rifle and fired, a rare and striking image of the monarch handling one of the United Kingdom's standard military weapons. In 1922, archaeologist Howard Carter broke the unbroken seal on Tutankhamun's tomb, untouched for over 3,000 years, revealing treasures more spectacular than any previously discovered in the history of Egyptology. In 1962, test pilot George Aird ejected sideways from a prototype jet that had nosedived toward the ground, while nearby his neighbor watched the terrifying scene from the seat of a tractor. In 1962, photographer Robert Halmy captured two boys in Kenya encountering one another across a divide of entirely different cultures in a single, quietly powerful image. At roughly 20 years old in 1938, Robert Wadlow, the tallest person in recorded history at 8 feet 11 inches, attempted to fold his towering frame into an elevator, his extraordinary growth driven by a pituitary gland that showed no sign of stopping. When James Naismith nailed 2 peach baskets to gymnasium balcony railings at Springfield College in 1891 and handed students a soccer ball, he unknowingly invented a game that would spread across the entire world within decades. Though company scientists and managers quietly protected themselves from radium exposure, they left 112 workers unguarded. Women who painted luminous dials without knowing the glowing substance was slowly and fatally poisoning them. Formed in October 1941 after Germany invaded the Soviet Union, the all-female 588th Night Bomber Aviation Regiment flew outdated wooden planes on silent nighttime raids, cutting their engines to glide undetected before dropping bombs, earning from terrified German soldiers the name Night Witches. Henry Fee ruled England for 37 years, marrying 6 women in the process. divorcing the first, beheading the second, losing the third to childbirth, quickly divorcing the fourth, executing the fifth, and being outlived by the sixth. By the early 1900s, children as young as 5 were working long hours in coal mines and cotton mills across America. They're small, hands and low wages, making them ideal workers for industries that had no concern for their health or childhood. In the early 20th century, Bedouin tribes moved their camel herds and tents with the seasons across the desert, reading the land for hidden water sources, until colonial governments and Middle Eastern states began seizing their traditional grazing routes and forcing many to abandon their nomadic way of life. The capote e capelo, a dark blue hooded cape from the Portuguese Azores, covered women from hood to foot in heavy whalebone cloth, passed down from mother to daughter for generations, and built to endure the island's famously harsh wind and rain. Between 1892 and 1954, roughly 12 million immigrants passed through Ellis Island, just off Manhattan, spending 3 to 7 hours under medical and legal inspection before being allowed to begin their new lives in America, though about 2% were turned away entirely. Built in 1874 and once called the most magnificent public library in the country, Cincinnati's Grand Reading Hall, with its 5-story bookshelves, spiral staircases, and skylit marble floors, was demolished in 1955 and replaced by a parking lot and an office building. Nikola Tesla, born in 1856 in what is now Croatia, designed the alternating current electrical system that powers most of the world today, yet died alone in a New York hotel room in 1943, caring for pigeons after his dream of free wireless global energy collapsed when investors withdrew their funding. By 1904, Henry Ford's cars could already reach 91 miles per hour on roads with no lane markings, no traffic lights, no speed limits, and no requirement for a driver's license. And by 1913, more than 4,000 people had died on American roads in a single year. Baked in Pompeii on the very morning Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 CE, this carbonized sourdough loaf sat in a baker's oven for nearly 1,800 years before archaeologists found it in the 1860s, still stamped with the name of a slave who survived. At just 20 years old, Catherine Switzer signed up for the 1967 Boston Marathon as KV. Switzer to hide her identity, and when a race official grabbed her and tried to rip off her number, she refused to stop and became the first woman to finish the race. Photographed by Nils Olsen Reppen, a Sogndal native who emigrated to Minnesota, then returned home to document his community. These images of rural Norwegian life around 1900 capture a world where half the country still farmed and nearly 1/3 had already left for America. Brought to the United States after Belgian colonial forces massacred his entire family in the Congo, Ota Benga was exhibited at the Bronx Zoo in 1906 before crowds who came to stare, part of a long, brutal tradition of human zoos that lasted until a World Fair in Belgium in 1958. Danish Arctic explorer Peter Freuchen lived among the Inuit, crossed Greenland coast to coast, and once dug himself out of a frozen snow cave, using a tool he made from his own frozen feces, before losing his foot to frostbite and later winning an Oscar for a film based on his Arctic books. American sculptor Anna Coleman Ladd spent a month crafting each portrait mask for disfigured World War I soldiers in her Paris studio, using pre-injury photographs, real human hair for eyebrows and lashes, and declaring the work finished only when the soldier looked at the mask and said, "That's me." Standing on wooden planks 6 meters above the ground to reach a narrower part of the trunk, loggers in 1800s, California spent weeks felling individual coastal redwoods, trees that had stood untouched for thousands of years, until careless industry had destroyed nearly 1/3 of all old-growth forest by 1900. By 1800, more than 30 million buffalo roamed North America, but within a century only around 400 remained in the wild, the deliberate result of a U.S. government strategy to destroy the food supply of Native American tribes and force them onto reservations. More than 3,000 years ago, archaeologists believe Tutankhamun himself suffered from acne, and the anti-acne remedies found inside his tomb hint at a condition so ancient that even the Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans had already tried everything from honey and sour milk to sulfur baths and magic spells. For 5 months in 1969, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers drained Niagara Falls entirely, hauling in 800 tons of rock to dam the river, while geologists examined the exposed cliff, and 100,000 curious visitors arrived in the very first week to see the silenced falls for themselves. From the 1890s to the 1930s, Americans packed by the tens of thousands into open fields to watch organizers pack 2 locomotives with dynamite, push them toward each other at 50 miles an hour, and cheer as the wreckage exploded, treating deliberate train crashes as festivals, complete with lemonade stands and carnival rides. Rolling through Jackson, Mississippi around 1900, this horse-drawn Coca-Cola delivery wagon carried the soft drink to customers at a time when the beverage industry was still finding its wheels on unpaved American streets. Released in 1969, the Blaupunkt Pop 70 brought bold, space-age sound design into the home, packaging its audio technology in a form that reflected the era's obsession with the future. Unveiled in 1965, the Corvette Mako Shark II turned heads as one of the most dramatically styled concept cars of its decade, its sleek predatory body lines drawing direct inspiration from the ocean's most feared creature. Painted in 1930, this illustration by Ecta Wagner imagined the world of the future, a vision of tomorrow dreamed up at a moment when aviation, electricity, and speed were transforming everything people thought possible. In the early 20th century, parents across Europe and America hung their infants in outdoor cages fixed to windowsills, genuinely believing that daily exposure to fresh air was essential to a baby's healthy development. During the Great Depression, crowds of men pressed against an employment office desk, their faces carrying the weight of an economic collapse that left millions of Americans without work, wages, or certainty about tomorrow. Standing on a Paris street in 1875, this public urinal served a city that had not yet solved the basic challenge of sanitation in one of the world's most celebrated capitals. Photographed around 1875 by John Thomas, Mr. Owen, the town bell ringer of Llangollen, Wales, stands as a quiet record of a community role that had called people to gather, worship, and mark the hours for centuries. Requiring a minimum crew of 3, 2 pilots and a flight engineer, Concorde's cockpit was among the most complex ever built, a wall of instruments and switches managing an aircraft that crossed the Atlantic faster than the speed of sound. Manufactured by Sony in Tokyo and now held in the Philadelphia Museum of Art, this 1982 Watchman portable television shrank the screen down small enough to carry in your hand, years before anyone imagined a device that could fit in a pocket. In a single small room on Bayard Street in 1885, a group of immigrant men shared what little space New York City's most overcrowded tenements could offer. Their cramped quarters a common reality for thousands who arrived hoping for a better life. On a congested Hester Street in New York City in 1903, pushcart vendors and merchants spilled into every inch of the road, turning the street itself into one of the city's most crowded and vivid open-air markets. Captured in 1946 at Bikini Atoll, this photograph of a nuclear test detonation freezes the terrifying power of an atomic explosion, one of the most unsettling images ever produced in the early years of the nuclear age. At a 1961 Hollywood audition, black cats competed for a film role while judges immediately disqualified any animal showing white patches on its nose or paws, applying casting standards as strict as those used for any human star. Built during World War II along the coast of Brittany, France, this German fortification was part of the vast Atlantic Wall, a network of concrete defenses the Nazis constructed in hopes of holding back an Allied invasion from the sea. In 1973, men played chess at the Széchenyi thermal bath in Budapest, combining the intellectual ritual of the game with one of Hungary's oldest and most beloved social institutions, just as bathers had gathered there for centuries. This 1955 photograph of the Las Vegas Strip captures the desert city at the very beginning of its transformation. A modest stretch of hotels and neon signs that would grow into one of the most recognizable skylines in the world. Loaded onto the Mississippi River in 1949, these brand new Ford automobiles made their way downstream toward dealerships across the country, fresh from the factories of a post-war America that was booming with production and consumer demand. In 1945, aerialist Betty Fox performed death-defying stunts from the rooftop of the Fort Shelby Hotel in Michigan, bringing the daredevil tradition of high-altitude performance to the vertical edges of the city's own skyline. At an unknown date, possibly the 1910s, a man cradles a full-grown donkey across his lap beneath the caption "Rockabye Baby," a quietly absurd image that seems to have been made simply for the joy of making someone laugh. In 1914, women bent over typewriting machines at the Blackheath Road Evening Institute in London, learning a skill that was quietly opening new doors into professional life at a moment when the world was about to be changed by war. In New York City in 1997, chess champion Garry Kasparov faced IBM's Deep Blue computer in a match the world watched closely, a contest that raised urgent questions about human intelligence, machine learning, and who would ultimately win. Between 1906 and 1915, thousands of workers carved one of the greatest engineering feats in American history through mountains and valleys, building the aqueduct system that would carry water hundreds of miles to supply the growing city of New York. Photographed in 1900 by F.A. Reinhardt, Chief Bill Rock of the Crow Nation, sits for a portrait that preserves his presence at the turn of a century that would bring immense and irreversible change to his people's way of life. Dressed and assembled beside their 1903 Cadillac model Tonneau, this family prepared for a journey at a moment when the automobile was still a novelty and the open road ahead of them was almost entirely unregulated. On the morning of December 6, 1917, a French cargo ship loaded with high explosives collided with a Norwegian vessel in Halifax Harbor, and the blast that followed was the largest human-made explosion the world had ever seen, releasing the equivalent of roughly 2.9 kilotons of TNT. Lined up in an American factory in 1944, newly assembled F-4U Corsairs and F-6F Hellcats waited to be shipped to the Pacific Theater, rolling off production lines that were running at full wartime speed to keep Allied pilots in the fight. Captured by photographer Mark Reboud in 1953, an Eiffel Tower painter works suspended above Paris, his body balanced against one of the iron beams of the landmark he was responsible for maintaining, one coat of paint at a time. Photographed together in the 1890s, the future King George V of Britain and Tsar Nicholas II of Russia posed as young men, two cousins whose family ties would not prevent their nations from fighting on opposite sides in the war that came next. On the set of Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds in 1963, actress Tippi Hedren paused for a light as a trained crow perched beside her, a small behind-the-scenes moment from one of the most unsettling films Hollywood had ever produced. Organized by Henry Cole and Prince Albert, and held in Hyde Park from May to October 1851, the Great Exhibition inside London's Crystal Palace was the first World's Fair, a landmark celebration of industry and culture that inspired dozens of similar events across the following century. In May 1937, aircraft flew between the towers and pedestrians filled the span as San Francisco celebrated the opening of the Golden Gate Bridge, a structure that had taken years to build across one of the most treacherous stretches of water on the West Coast. In 1928, hop pickers walked on stilts across a farm in Wateringbury, Kent, a practical solution to reaching the higher vines during a harvest that had drawn seasonal workers to the English countryside for generations. Silent film actor Lon Chaney opened his personal makeup kit and transformed himself entirely for the 1925 role of the Phantom of the Opera, his face before and after, the process separated by nothing but craft, patience, and a remarkable set of tools. Photographed in Japan in the early 1900s, this laborer stands in his raincoat with the quiet dignity of someone captured in the middle of an ordinary working day, an unposed record of daily life at the turn of the century. At a factory in Inglewood, California in October 1942, an assembly line worker bent over the engine of a B-25 bomber, one of thousands of workers whose daily labor on the production floor was as essential to the war effort as any soldier in the field. In 1954, Marilyn Monroe visited injured American troops in Japan, pausing beside a soldier who had broken his back and was required to heel facing downward, a rare and quietly affecting image of the actress away from the spotlight. In 1903, workers raised telephone lines across Cortland, Kansas, threading the town into a growing national network that was slowly connecting communities across America, one wooden pole at a time. Photographed at Ellis Island in the 1900s, an immigrant family stands at the threshold of a new country, carrying whatever they could bring with them, and staking everything on the hope that America would give them a life worth the journey. In 1923, German children flew a kite built from paper currency, the banknotes so worthless from hyperinflation that money had become more useful as a toy than as a means of buying anything at all. Built in the 1930s, this Coca-Cola soda fountain car carried the brand's signature drinks directly to customers, combining the novelty of the automobile with a growing American appetite for a cold, soft drink served on the spot. On Bougainville in 1943, two Navajo code talkers transmitted battlefield messages in their native language, a form of communication the enemy never cracked, making them one of the most effective and irreplaceable tools the United States military deployed in the Pacific. Photographed in North Africa in 1943, General George S. Patton stood on the continent, where he was building the reputation for aggressive, relentless command that would define his legacy as one of the most forceful American generals of the Second World War. Photographed in 1955, a man sits enclosed in a sauna tub, one of countless strange exercise and wellness contraptions from a decades-long era when inventors offered the public increasingly unusual machines promising health, fitness, and relief. In 1965, workers in the quality control room at EMI's pressing plant in London listened carefully to copies of the Beatles' Rubber Soul fresh off the production line, ensuring that one of the most important albums of the decade reached listeners exactly as it was meant to sound. Photographed between 1905 and 1915 in Samarkand, Uzbekistan, a melon vendor stands with his wares in a region whose markets had drawn traders from across Central Asia for centuries along the ancient Silk Road. In early 20th century New York, two boys faced arrest for pickpocketing, their youth offering no protection from a legal system that regularly processed child offenders in a city where poverty and survival often overlapped. At the Faculty of Medicine in Kabul in 1962, two Afghan students leaned in alongside their professor to examine a plaster anatomical cast, a glimpse of a country that was then investing in modern education and professional training for its young population. In September 1908, young drivers and trapper boys at the Brown Mine in West Virginia went underground at 7 in the morning and did not emerge until 5:30 at night. Children performing dangerous industrial labor at an age when they should have been in school. At a 1955 outdoor Tupperware party, the product was passed from hand to hand among guests who were required by a strict dress code to wear skirts and stockings. a snapshot of the consumer culture and social expectations that shaped post-war American suburban life. In 1928, Londoners packed tightly onto a city bus, filling every inch of the upper and lower decks in a scene that captured the sheer density of daily movement through one of the world's largest and most congested urban centers. On August 15, 1944, American paratroopers from the 1st Airborne Task Force dropped from the sky into southern France during Operation Dragoon, one of the largest airborne operations of the Second World War's final push to liberate Western Europe. Painted in 1858, this canvas imagines Napoleon standing before the Great Sphinx, while his army stretches into the desert behind him. A romantic vision of conquest and ancient grandeur painted nearly 6 decades after the actual Egyptian campaign took place. On the assembly line at Ford's Highland Park plant in Michigan in 1913, workers built the Model T in a system of moving production that had just been introduced, a method that would transform manufacturing, lower the price of the automobile, and change the world. Photographed on Morris Island, South Carolina in July 1863, the shattered muzzle of a 300-pound Parrott rifle shows what happened when one of the Civil War's most powerful artillery pieces was pushed beyond what its metal could withstand. Loaded onto log trucks in North Bend, Washington in 1943, these massive timber hauls fed a wartime industry that was cutting and moving wood at full industrial pace to supply the construction and manufacturing demands of a nation at war. In the 1920s, Americans pulled their automobiles off the road and set up camp wherever the land allowed. A new kind of freedom made possible by the car, the open highway, and the growing belief that the country itself was worth exploring. Detonated on May 9, 1951, as part of Operation Greenhouse at the Pacific Proving Grounds, this explosion was the first thermonuclear bomb test in history, yielding 225 kilotons and marking a terrifying leap forward in the destructive power humanity had placed in its own hands. In November 1926, sheep walked along Kingsway in central London after the city introduced flocks to its parks in the 1920s and 1930s, a practical and cost-cutting solution for keeping the grass trimmed without the expense of mechanical mowing. Etched with the words, "For the Commonwealth of England," and dating to around 1650, Oliver Cromwell's broadsword is now held by the Philadelphia Museum of Art, a physical remnant of the man who led Parliament's armies against King Charles I and reshaped the English state. In a single photograph from 1894, Queen Victoria, known as the Grandmother of Europe, sits surrounded by Kaiser Wilhelm II, Tsar Nicholas II, and the future King Edward VII, a family portrait whose subjects would within 2 decades stand on opposing sides of the bloodiest war the world had yet seen. In the 1920s, a Chevrolet car converted to run on railway tracks carried a track inspector along a bush railway bridge over a gorge in New Zealand, a practical and inventive solution to the challenge of maintaining remote rail lines with the tools of the road. Between 1897 and 1930, the hilly terrain of central Seattle was systematically blasted and washed away in what may have been the largest deliberate reshaping of urban land in history, transforming the city's topography to make way for streets, buildings, and a modern downtown grid. On a lower Manhattan street in 1902, laundry lines stretched between tenement buildings as families hung their washing above the crowded city below, an everyday act of domestic life played out publicly in the sky above one of New York's most densely packed neighborhoods. In the 1950s, the television arrived in the family living room and changed everything. A father pausing his newspaper, a mother and children gathered around the screen, the first generation to sit together in the blue glow of a world that had come directly into the home. In 1899, French illustrators led by Jean-Marc Coté imagined what life in the year 2000 would look like. And this image of a futuristic barber reflected the era's fascination with machines, electricity, and the transformation of even the most ordinary daily rituals. Built by Hungarian engineers using a salvaged T-34 tank fitted with two MiG-21 jet engines, the Big Wind was deployed in Kuwait in 1991 and was capable of extinguishing raging oil well fires with a single overwhelming blast of engineered force. Smiling on the Western Front in 1917, this British soldier held up his damaged helmet, a dent or hole that, by the narrowest margin, had stopped a bullet or shrapnel from ending his life on the same ground where so many others had already lost theirs. On New York's East 58th Street in 1960, photographer Ormond Gigli filled every window of a condemned building with women in formal dress. Capturing the image, on the last day, the structure stood before it was knocked down the following morning.